Hi, Tom.
Hello.
Now, just for those listening and watching this, I just let them know that this is take three because we've had terrible time with Microsoft Teams, haven't we? And we're
Yeah.
trying Zoom. Thanks for your time uh, to contribute to this interview, Tom. Can I start by asking you to introduce yourself and your organisation, please?
Yeah. My name is Tom Brown. I am the Chief Executive of the Greenlight Trust. We're an environmental education charity. We cover kind of Suffolk and Norfolk and a little bit up in Essex. And we basically work with people who are struggling, marginalised, disadvantaged in one form or another. We use natural environment to support their recovery, development, or just progression whilst they're with us.
Thank you. Fantastic. Great start. Tom, I've got four questions for you. And the first one is this. It's about how you've been looking after yourself during the pandemic and how you've supported your team.
Okay, yeah. So I'll address those the other way around. So I'll start with the team. So we employ 40 staff, and when we came into the very start of the pandemic, despite the panic and the kind of worry and things like that, we adapted pretty quickly. We changed what we do. We've introduced a kind of online offering. So if anything, we might be in contact with kind of 200 adults and similar kind of children and young people at any one point in time. And my staff are giving. They want to support people, much like many other kind of organisations and staff in the third sector. And that adaptation allowed them to still be able to give, to know that they were still supporting those people, still gave them purpose, and regular contact. But the other side of that was about their kind of well-being within that as well. Those staff are used to being in the woods, they're used to supporting people in the woods, and that was a big change. And then sitting the other end of the screen, inspiring and getting people out and doing all of that side of it. So now we've kind of moved to a slightly different model where we're still doing stuff face to face, but with those that are identified as high risk. So the adults that are kind of high suicide risk. We've also got people with special educational needs who we're still supporting face to face, and some of the schools work with those guys who are kind of high needs or can't engage with some of the online offerings, so ASD, things like that. And the other side of that is allowing those staff to have a kind of blend of some online stuff and some face-to-face, and they're still getting out into the woods. But in addition to that, we've got things, so they've got access to counselling. There's some meditation that is happening, but led by one of my staff, and a bit of formulation, so they're cutting down stuff with each other and talking through things. But the main kind of my responsibility, I guess, in supporting staff, I thought right from the very start of it was ensuring that they were aware of the resilience of the organisation, so that they're comfortable that they're in a financially resilient charity as best as it can be, as things are at the moment, and that their jobs are not at risk. Because that was the biggest thing, that if I can give them that strong platform, that they can still carry on and deliver the support that they need to. For me, a little bit different, I guess. So I sit in this grey box on a daily basis, talking to different people about how amazing it is to get outdoors and benefit from the natural environment. But I guess early on, I was trying to get involved with lots of things because you feel like you need to as leading an organisation, and I've cut that right back to engaging with the things where I feel I'm able to make the most difference and have the greatest impact, and engaging with other people who not so necessarily think the same as me, but have the same approach to partnerships and things like that as me. So that has been quite helpful and healthy. but also, I mean, exercise is important to me. So I run. I've continued to do that throughout, and made the time to do that. But I've also adjusted my goals, I think, is probably a big thing. And I guess kind of really good example of that. I mean, I was running the other day in the snow, and I was thinking about what I was doing at that point in time, and I was quite you get this kind of epiphany, and it's this is just like how we're having to adapt to COVID, really, from a business and charitable perspective. You know, I'm not going to run as far today because I'm running through a snowdrift. I'm not going to run as quick today. I'm going to have to slow down, and I'm going to have to be comfortable with the fact that I'm not running as quick. But I'm still going to do it, and I'm still going to end up back at home and at the point where I need to end up. So yeah, that was quite a cathartic experience that I had when I came to the end of it. The one bit that I have noticed though, and one thing that I feel from my own well-being that I've lost a little bit in this, is I coached my son's football team, and I wasn't aware of just how much I got out of that, from that feeling of giving and that side of it. So yeah, that's been quite interesting. So we stay in contact with the boys, and we're giving them things to do, exercises and stuff to keep them fit. You feel like you're still giving in that sense, I guess.
Brilliant. Thank you. I mean, you started with purpose about for your team and your colleagues, and then you finished with purpose about yourself. I really like to hear what you said about supporting your team around their well-being, meditation, the fact that their work environment has flipped and changed so quickly and so dramatically. The fact, and also face-to-face offers that so many other organisations struggle to do so, especially our statutory partners. Employment worries, taking that away from them was critical. And I also like the fact, as a leader, that you realised that you needed to have more realistic goals, and that metaphor described it really well. Thanks, Tom. My next question is this: so, how do you feel COVID has highlighted the significance of the natural environment to society?
In some ways, it's been the most interesting thing that's come out of COVID, and you know, that sounds bad to say, but the bit that I have observed is people seeing how much they can get out of being in a natural environment and how important it is to them. We still, when we came into the first lockdown, the sun was shining, and the sun shone a lot, and I looked out of my window of my grey box, and the sun was shining, and you know, people were just walking. People were seeing areas around their houses that they'd never seen. They were seeing foxes, seeing deer, seeing all sorts of things that were coming out, and appreciating the huge value of it. But not necessarily. We don't really demonstrate the value of it. I don't think we fully appreciate the value of what we've got. And that's not necessarily our fault. I think is that it's not commonly understood the huge benefits that engaging with the natural environment bring to people's health in particular. We know that there are significant health indicators that can be influenced by engaging and being in the natural environment. So mental health is clearly one of those, but things like sleep are influenced by that. Birth weights are influenced by proximity to nature. Blood pressure, choices about how we exercise, the food that we eat, the social interaction, even as far as cortisol levels in our blood. So stress hormones within our blood are affected by interactions with nature. It's really interesting as well that quite a lot of these things are contributory factors to higher incidence of poor and bad effects of COVID on people, and actually higher mortality as well. So the life expectancy is one of those things that can be demonstrated to be affected by your proximity to nature. the biggest bit that I've seen highlighted within all of this, if we kind of think back to, I've got a garden, many people I know have got gardens, and they're able to sit out in there. What we did see though is people who don't live in particularly rural areas. You might live in a block of flats, and then the park is closed, and you can't go to there, so you don't have access to that. And so I think what we've seen is the huge inequalities of access to the natural environment, and it's great that we understand it and we appreciate the value of it and its importance to us. But a really good example of that is, so people from minority ethnic backgrounds, if we take just BAME as an example, 40% of people in the UK live in green space deprived areas. You compare that with 12% of white people in the UK, that's a stark contrast. That is a huge inequality. And actually, if we then translate that back to some of the inequalities that we've seen from COVID, we start to understand why some of those things are happening. But the other side of that, we know there's a socioeconomic link between green space and proximity to it. So if we look at tree canopy coverage, for instance, in towns and cities, those areas that are more affluent have more trees in them. You know it. If you walk around areas, even Ipswich, London, places like that, you go to the nice areas, they have a lot more trees there. The interesting side of that is that when we look at the health inequalities that nature can help to address, or proximity to green space can help to address, we've seen one more recently where we know that trees reduce pollution. We know even Cotoneaster as a plant massively reduces pollution in areas where it's planted as a hedge. We've seen the first prosecution or attributing a death of a child due to pollution. And we then start to look at inequalities, and we start to see where I think not only we have to retain the fact that we need to reduce that inequality, but it also needs to be a kind of basic human right to have access to the natural environment. We've been going through a kind of piece of strategic work as a charity before lockdown, the first lockdown, and during, and we now describe our vision is that a society where everyone has equitable access to the power of nature. And so in doing so, we recognise that there are lots of organisations who give people access to nature. So the RSPB, the Wildlife Trusts, the National Trust, and a whole host of others. Generally, it's very similar demographic. We recognise that we are actively seeking to give access to those people who don't have it at the moment. And then the other really interesting side of that is those health inequalities that I've just described, where we are able to prove. So we empirically prove that we work with the lowest 5% population on wellbeing scores. We prove that we can move those people kind of 1.4 along those measures. Significant life events like a birth or a death, they probably have about a 1 point effect in that. So we demonstrate. We also, it's been proven that those who are the furthest away from and have the lowest scores within there will gain the most by engaging with the natural environment. So again, it's there. And in the areas where we live, actually, it's the thing that we have in abundance. We might not have the best train links or anything like that, but we have got natural capital in abundance.
That's fascinating. Really fascinating. And I'm particularly interested in something that I sort of pick up from you, and that triangulation between life expectancy, green space deprivation, and pollution. And there's not much else you need to say other than the evidence that you've just described in order that we should get more money funded into the kind of work that you're doing, which is brilliant. Tom, thank you. My next question is, what do you think will be the long-term impacts on the voluntary community sector from COVID?
Yeah, that's a double-edged question. I think that is. So it depends. So I'm a natural optimist. So I'm quite an optimistic person. But I mean, I've got fears definitely, and I think they're well founded. So I think as a sector, yes, there will be less funding available. I think we can all see that. I think there'll be a higher need for services that that the sector provides. I think we will see, the danger is that we see a loss of some organisations, and an impact on those organisations that are working in there. I think the impact will be on staff, but it will also be on an impact on those organisations themselves trying to cope with the need that comes to them. So I guess that's my fear. But like I said, I'm quite optimistic. I think some of the barriers that that the sector faced in engaging with other sectors, so health, education, things like that, have started to move because of COVID. I think some of those have started to be broken down, and I think people are very consciously looking at the sector and saying, are the answers there? We're needing to look into that sector to see whether the answers are there. Do we need to invest in it? And I see that. I mean, you could kind of think, people are looking and saying, is there a way that we can do the same thing but cheaper by using the sector? And I think that's definitely not the approach that I hope would come. So I think the wider kind of third sector for me is all about diversity and inclusion, and about being able to offer the right thing for the person that they need, and recognizing that everybody is different and everybody is going to need different approaches. There isn't a one size fits all to coping with mental health, or supporting people with special educational needs, or drug and alcohol recovery, and all of these different things. Different people will have different ways of recovering and moving forward with their lives. I hope, and from an optimistic perspective, is that now some of those barriers are being broken down, and there are commissioners looking and saying, okay, how can we do things a little bit differently? How do we engage their services? I think true collaboration and partnership will come off the back of COVID. I think there are organisations who are now working together who never worked together before, and I think they are understanding the benefits of working together properly, not just for some funding, but actually saying, look, we are going to cooperate long term and support each other. So I think that's a real benefit. But the other side of it, this crisis has forced the sector to adapt and develop and innovate. And I think in some ways, across a number of sectors, but including the third sector, that was needed as well. So I think there is the potential for there being hugely negative effects on the sector, but also I think with that, with challenge comes opportunity as well. And I think those that are can respond to that opportunity will find that that others are really open to listen. And like I said, I'm optimistic, so I would think that.
No, I get that. And so the way I hear you is you talk about your guarded optimism, but also about trusted collaboration being absolutely critical.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tom. We're on to our last question. So what looking at the future, what challenges and learning do you think will come from this outbreak?
That's huge. So challenges first, I guess. So I think there are going to be ever increasing challenges facing society. So health inequalities are going to grow. I think we can all start to see that this pandemic is going to settle down, and actually globally we're going to see health inequalities grow, because some countries have access to a vaccine and other countries have access to a vaccine when you've got some left over, and we'll give it to you once we've got what we want. I think there's a, there's a, there was the thing that I worry about is that reducing liberalism and understanding, and that people aren't traveling so much, people aren't experiencing so much of the world. There isn't that kind of cross pollination where we're starting to continue to understand different cultures. And I think depending on how long this goes on for, I think there's a potential reduction in understanding within society. And I think we saw that initially, where we see the rise of persecution of minority groups, which people certainly, and we saw it off the back of Brexit a little bit, where people felt like they had a justification for voicing some opinions, and I think we're seeing the same here. Employment challenges. So if we've got, I especially worry about the people that we support, and that ultimately, for a number of the people that we support, employment is an outcome, and we know if we can get them into meaningful employment, actually some of the other things that in their lives start to recover, and they can contribute and feel of worth. I mean, before we came into COVID, every job, I think, is about 1.5 people per job vacancy we're applying. We're now looking at 7, 8, 9 people per vacancy, and how that settles down is no one really knows. Depends on as we open up. So that worries me, because the people that we work with are just moving further down the line in that line. Education attainment gaps growing. That really concerns me, particularly for the guys that we work with. So those where you've got people who are in a stable family and they're supported at home, they will still continue to develop, and they'll be supported by family. But where you've got those young people who maybe don't have a stable home life, or the school is the place where they're able to progress, that education attainment gap growing. And even between state and public schools, you're going to see different reactions to the way that they're educating pupils. So that really worries me. But I guess on the positive side of that, there's been massive leaps forward in technology. The less of a need for travel. So from an environmental perspective, there's been a huge reduction in the amount of cars on the road, the amount of people flying, the amount of carbon being produced, and I think we're yet to see the impact of that. Yes, there's maybe more plastic pollution as face masks get chucked down on the ground, but the reduction on environmental impact of the way that we live our lives, I think I'm kind of really hopeful that some of that is retained as we move back in, and this has gone on for a while, that we move back into practices, and we don't all say, okay, well, actually now I need to drive to the office every day again, or now I've got 3 meetings across, and if that's a 150-mile round journey, I'm going to sit in my car for most of the day and drive to those journeys, and I'm going to sit here and I'm going to have this conversation like we are. I think people's perceptions of what is a good life has changed. I think people's needs have changed, and I think we're seeing more people moving out of cities into the country, because actually the thing that is important to them has kind of changed. But I guess the biggest piece of learning is kind of the bit that we spoke about, is that my personal opinion, I think a lot of people would probably support that, is COVID for me is a symptom of our impact. As when I say I mean human impact on the environment. And I think in the fullness of time, we will kind of look back and say, yeah, okay, that was that. I hope that we look back and say that was a wake-up call that we needed to reduce our kind of taking mentality, and start to understand that actually this coming about has been driven by the way that we've acted, and adjust accordingly so that it doesn't happen. But that's, again, I'm optimistic, so I hope that's what comes out of it. But it feels a little bit like as humans, we're a bit like a rubber band. So you get stretched to a point, and you almost need to hold it there long enough so that the stretch goes, so that retains. Whereas if you don't hold it long enough, you just let go, and we ping back to listen to people talking about when we go back to normality and we go back to the lives that we were living before. I kind of hope that we don't all go back to those lives that we were living before, and we lose the negative parts of it.
And we can each pick up one of those posty rubber bands that we find on the streets when we go for walks, to do that experiment. Now, you're right about health inequalities. I think that's a huge challenge, and it will continue to grow unless as a system we address it. And I agree with you about the environmental footprint, and also the fact that the pandemic probably comes from the impact of us as a human race on nature and the environment. Tom, thank you so much for your thoughts, all your thoughts.
Thank you.
And I appreciate your time, especially as this was take 3.
Yeah, thank you.